Good afternoon, members. Welcome to this meeting of the Planning Board. We have apologies from both the Chair and the Vice Chair. Therefore, the first item of business will be to formally call for a Chair for today's meeting. Can I call for nominations?
Done.
So I've got Councillor Macaulay proposed. Is that agreed by the board? Yeah. I'll hand over to Councillor Macaulay. Second button down.
We learn how to work the buttons here. Welcome to the Planning Application Board meeting, Wednesday, 24th June. We have the minutes of the last meeting on the 31st of March. Could I get someone to propose it, please? Robert, and thank you, and seconded by Councillor Murray.
Councillor Thompson online, is it?
Councillor Thompson online? No, sorry. Declaration of interests. Members are asked to declare an interest they may have in any items on the agenda. It would be helpful if members explain why they are declaring an interest in the item concerned. Has anybody got any? No. The agenda before members today includes consideration of 2 planning applications, followed by a report on a response to a consultation by Scottish ministers in relation to a development in marine waters. There will be a further short briefing ahead of the board's consideration on the last item. In relation to the planning applications, I will remind members that you need to consider if you have preempted the decision before making process by declaring support or opposition for the application in advance of the meeting, or by lobbying other members for a particular outcome before being able to participate in any planning decision. Any motion or amendment in relation to a planning application must be based solely on planning reasons. If a member moves an amendment, the chair will invite him or her to clearly articulate the amendment and the planning reasons upon which it is based. Thereafter, the chair may, at his discretion, continue the business of the meeting in accordance with the time-out protocol, dealing with amendments contrary to officer recommendations. A copy of the time-out protocol has been made available to all members via the Planning Applications Board folder on SharePoint. The planning officer will present the recommendation of officers. In the event of a member seeking to move an amendment, the chair may call upon the legal advisor or the planning advisor to provide advice to the board. So we have 3 items in front of us today. Number 1 is a proposed temporary workers residential accommodation, including welfare facilities, parking, associated infrastructure and other auxiliary developments at the old dormitory site in Marybank. The planning application is classed as a major development under the Town and Country Planning Scotland Regulation Act. The application cannot be determined under the delegation, and in accordance with the scheme of delegation is referred to the Planning Applications Board to make a recommendation to the Council. The Council will consider the application at the full meeting tomorrow. Helen MacDonald will speak to the report and answer any questions. Helen.
Thank you, Chair. As noted, it's a planning application, a major application for a temporary workers residential accommodation facility at the old dormitory site in Marybank. I'll just take you through some visuals on the slides to give you some context for the site and the proposals and talk you through the main issues that were raised and considered in the report. So just to give you a wider context, you see the little yellow star in the top left section of the screen there, that's the site. You can see it's just on the western edge of Stornoway on the Lochs Road on the way out of town. Taking you in a wee bit further, again, you can see my attempt to indicate the boundary of the site in the red line there. For a wee bit more context, you can see the golf course just to the south of the road and the castle grounds. On the east, on the right-hand side of your screen, you can see the Comhairle depot, the Scottish Water depot and offices, and the HHP offices, in case that gives you a wee bit more of an understanding of the location. The nearest housing to the site is indicated in the wee yellow circle at the top there. And then to the south of the site, you can see the Marybank industrial area and more housing surrounding there at Althebroich, Memorial View and Eilean. The proposal, again, workers for residential accommodation, it's presented in 4 two-storey blocks for a maximum of 200 residents with associated amenity facilities in the form of a separate gymnasium, a 2-storey canteen and leisure building and a facilities management office. There's also proposals to have an on-site generator and water tank storage, and it's within the main settlement of Stornoway. The application site extends to approximately 2.8 hectares. Site is currently disused and was previously a builder's yard. As seen on the maps, the surrounding uses are generally industrial, residential, with some agricultural uses also. And again, the policies of the Lewis Castle grounds are to the southeast, opposite the entrance to the site from the A859. Site is not within any areas designated for habitats or landscape value. And again, a major development within the hierarchy and was subject to the pre-application consultation process, which is a formal public consultation process held in advance of the application being submitted. That pre-application process involved 2 public meetings and was advertised and promoted through local press and online. There was also online feedback options for those who could not attend meetings. The comments, responsive changes to the proposals and any additions that were considered from the public engagement process have been consolidated and submitted in the form of a pre-application consultation report which accompanies this planning application. To get you into a bit more detail now, we've still got that aerial shot on your right there, and on the left it shows the indicative layout. So you can see that the site already contains a predominant main access as well as smaller access routes throughout, which are proposed to be reutilised and extended to serve the 4 accommodation blocks, which you can see in blue, the leisure and canteen block, the other 2-storey unit, which you can see in a light purple, and then the smaller single-storey buildings in green. And at the very north of the site there, you can see a pink highlight. That is the proposed generator compound. Currently, the local network provider, SSEN, do not have capacity to provide for some larger developments as they await ongoing infrastructure upgrades. So they're proposing on-site electricity generation. I hope this is a helpful shot, an aerial view taken from the kind of east-northeast, looking southwest over the site. You can see the Marybank depot, the council depot, just at the bottom of the image there. Marybank Industrial Estate in the top left, housing beyond. Central is obviously the development site. You'll see a small white roof building that is no longer there, a temporary building from quite some time ago. And you can see the bunds and vegetation and existing small access routes as they go across the site. To show you the type of unit proposed, they are prefabricated units, 2-storey in height in a dark green colour with a maximum height of 6.9 metres. They are proposed on a temporary period. It's a 5-year duration that is being sought for the units being sited on the site. And an indication of the smaller ancillary buildings, approximately 3.6 metres at the highest point. I'll take you through some images of the site. It can be quite hard to orient yourself given the undulating topography and bunds and various things on site. So we'll refer back to the aerial at the end if you have any queries. This is the existing access, which is proposed to be retained and utilised as existing. You pass through another area of disused builder's yard before you come to the application site. The application site is just beyond those two pillars you can see in the centre left of the image there. The site is a mix of aggregates that have been left from its previous use, many of which have already started to vegetate, bunds that were used to screen the site previously, some more mature vegetation in forms of trees, and unfortunately also some invasive species with gunnera and rhododendron across the site also, which have self-seeded and taken. There is some ponding of water on site due to the clay soils. There is proposals within the application to have appropriate surface water management to drain and treat surface water runoff from the site. This is a slightly zoomed in application at the top northwest corner. If you can just see a small white gable on the top right there, I just wanted to highlight the nearest housing. You can see there's already quite dense planting proposed to be retained between the site and the nearest adjacent property. This is taken from above the application site on some more of the disused yard, just to give you some context of where it sits in relation to the War Memorial, which is discussed in detail in the report. The actual application site sits some 2.5 to 3 metres below this level. The developer has done some mock-up visualizations. I will caveat that they are quite basic, so I'll try and explain them through the next wee series of images. This is taken from the War Memorial, looking towards the site, which is highlighted with the red arrow there. You can see the existing Marybank Industrial Estate in the top left, and some of the memorial view and other housing development in Marybank Benadrove, just behind it there. When creating the mock-up, sorry, the first image there was a zoomed image. When creating the mock-up, the developer has used a blocking system for the existing buildings. So they might not appear quite how they look, but they've done it to try and show massing and height in comparison to the proposal, which will be in the next slide. So you can see again the council depot in the far left, Marybank Industrial Site in the top left, and the proposed units, which are very dark green and can be quite hard to pick out, are shown in the centre of the render there. What the visualisation does demonstrate is that based on mass and height, the units would not break above the skyline and would be viewed from the War Memorial in the context of existing built development in the surrounding area. 3 public representations were received, and they can be summarised as follows. I'll give you a moment to read those, and these are addressed in detail in the report. So the key planning issues that came out of the assessment from our own policies, consultees, and also the third-party representation were the principle of the development at the location, potential for impact on the historic environment, impacts on settlement character, residential amenity impacts, and also the impact on habitat and wildlife. The report sets out an appraisal of these issues and all other relevant planning issues. The application was also accompanied by supporting information to help in these assessments. It was in the form of a suite of documents, which include a design and access statement, a preliminary ecological appraisal, followed by an environmental report, a heritage appraisal, and also the required pre-application consultation statement. We note that mitigation measures within these documents can be secured by conditions if the application is approved. Planning applications require to be determined in accordance with the provision of the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. Having assessed the application, the proposal is for approval, subject to conditions to manage the impacts and delivery of the proposed temporary accommodation. Take you back to the site plan, and if you wish, to the overhead aerial if anyone has any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Helen, for that detailed report. Is there any questions or comments? Councillor George Murray.
Thank you, Chair. What's the capacity of the development, and will it be running At full capacity. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that question, Councillor Murray. So the maximum capacity is 200 persons. They believe there will be a small period of max capacity midway through the 5-year consent, but it's likely to be running closer to about 120 to 150 based on the information submitted within their design and access statement.
Thank you. Councillor Susan Thompson online.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the report. My only question was about the concerns that had been raised by residents about antisocial behaviour and safety. Are these blocks going to be mixed gender, or is it going to be predominantly single male occupation?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the question, Councillor Thompson. This is not something we've specifically queried with the developer. It's not particularly a planning issue, though I can appreciate why you'd want to consider that in relation to the potential for antisocial behaviour. In the antisocial behaviour context, we did consult Police Scotland on the development. Unfortunately, we didn't receive a direct response, but it's important to note that when we're considering the applications, we have to consider what the inherent likelihood of antisocial behaviour is, such that it would become a material planning consideration. If the development is occupied and operated as proposed, there shouldn't be any antisocial behaviour that would be overwhelming and thus a material planning consideration. Any criminality obviously would have to be dealt with directly by the police. And I would note that the developer did indicate that they would be having wardens on site to address potential issues like that, and that they wanted to engage with the community. Again, not something we can direct directly through the planning process, but useful to note when making your considerations.
Thanks for that. Just one follow-up, Chair, if I might. Do we have any evidence from other similar sites, from other local authorities, or even from our own experience about the impact of these sorts of temporary communities on our own communities?
It's not something I have significant detail on, to be honest. We did look at other developments of a similar nature that are coming forward in other areas. One recently approved in Highland, for example. I think it's hard to make generalisations, obviously, on these matters, because it will vary depending on individuals. I would say that the nature so far of ones that we've seen consented away is that developers are very, very aware of the potential impact on local communities and of their responsibilities in that regard. Again, not something that's directly taken through the planning process, but something that developers have highlighted in their submissions that they're conscious of trying to ensure does not become problematic. There are other mechanisms post-planning, if it were approved, obviously, that can deal with antisocial behaviour problems, noise issues from either the police or from our environmental health section if it becomes problematic.
Thanks very much, Chair. It is a concern that it was raised by the communities and hasn't specifically been addressed in the report, and the acknowledgement there that the police haven't actually responded. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Just again, Chief Executive, Martin Choice.
Thank you. I can talk perhaps specifically around some of the action that we took during the Western Isles Schools programme, where at its peak we had 250 people helping support the construction of the schools, albeit over a larger geographic area. The vast majority of those were based in and around Stornoway. Through agreement with the various contractors, we adopted a charter approach to antisocial behaviour, and that included a zero tolerance approach to any antisocial behaviour, and we worked very closely with Gordon MacLeod, I think was the senior police officer at that time in Stornoway. We have had some discussions. Myself and the Chief Officer Education met with some senior police officers several weeks ago. The matter came up, and we have continued to discuss with them various criteria that we'd look to implement. They're obviously very keen to understand the totality of the people that we're coming. There is work happening behind the scenes to try and map what that looks like across not only this application, but in terms of investment as a whole, the total numbers of people that will be here through the period of the renewables investment. So we'll continue to work very closely with Police Scotland, Ross McCartney in particular, to understand all of that. And again, my view would be is that we adopt a zero tolerance approach to any antisocial behaviour from any of the supply chain that are providing work on the islands at this time, and that's to help minimise impact on the existing communities. Thanks.
Thank you for that. On Gordon, so Councillor Gordon Murray.
Maybe there's more discussion because I want to move that we refuse planning application. So I'm happy to listen to other comments or questions, but I want to move to refuse.
Okay, thank you. I'll continue with anybody else first. Councillor Mustafa Hussain.
You're on mute, Mustafa.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks, Helen, for your report. I don't know if it's strictly a planning issue, but in terms of welfare, Helen, was there any discussion with the NHS in terms of additional pressure that an extra 200 people in the town will add to the service, to the product? Have you heard me?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Mustafa. We also consulted NHS Western Isles. Unfortunately, again, we didn't receive a direct response. So we've done our best to consider the likely matters in relation to health provision, and you've discovered my one typing error where I said schools provision on the front page of my report. My apologies, it should have been health services. So we did consult, didn't receive a response. The developer did address this in their submissions. The majority of the workers will be working on a 2-week rotation. We don't anticipate that they would need direct GP care due to that, but we understand there's obviously the potential for out of hours and emergency provision, hence the reason we consulted. The number, although it's large, is not significant in the grander scheme of Stornoway and the provision of the Western Isles Hospital, but we did make NHS Western Isles aware, and it is definitely a wider consideration. My colleagues very kindly advised me that the Major Developments Forum, of which the Council is a part, along with the police and the NHS Western Isles, are discussing these matters and how to ensure that it is addressed for the larger developments that are coming to the island potentially.
Thanks, Helen.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Norman MacDonald, Norrie.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm grateful for the Chief Executive for his continued observance of historical charters and hopefully bringing them forward with the developments we're going to see over the next few years, particularly here on the islands. With my hat as Chair of the Licensing Board, can I ask that we be kept appraised of any meetings to discuss charters and also the local pub watch scheme as well, in conjunction with Police Scotland, so that we do come to a working arrangement going forward, because we're aware that there will be issues, and it's just a case that we have a working charter, so that we do have a zero tolerance policy, so that any breaches of that charter will result in somebody being dismissed.
Thank you, Norman. Norrie. Anybody else before I go? Councillor George Murray.
Thanks for letting me in again, Chair. Maybe this is inappropriate. Is the development, is it going to be licensed, do we think, or will there be a pub there, for instance?
No, they've not applied for any licensing on site, and it's unlikely, if there were a future application, that would be considered appropriate given the context.
Thank you, George. Going back to Councillor Murray, do you have an amendment that you wish to put forward, Councillor Murray?
Thank you, Chair. I wondered if I could outline the reasons why I'm proposing that we refuse planning application, and then maybe that a timeout protocol be used so that I can, make sure that it complies with the regulations of putting forward an amendment for planning. If that's okay. So would I be able to tell you the reasons why, and then we can go on if that's...
Well, we'd have to get a seconder, but I'll allow you to outline the reasons first, and then we can see if you're going to seconder.
So, okay, so in my opinion, the proposed temporary worker accommodation village would have an unacceptable impact on the living condition and amenity of nearby residents due to its scale, noise from generators and general activity, light pollution, increased traffic and overlooking. This is not the right location for a development of this nature. The development would also harm the setting of the Lewis War Memorial. From the memorial itself, the blocks would be clearly visible in the southern view and would change the character of this important place, especially during times of remembrance. Now, while I acknowledge the need for accommodation linked to developments, this particular site is too close to existing homes and does not sit comfortably with the surrounding area. Other more suitable sites closer to Arnish have been suggested. The local community would see very little direct benefit from this proposal while having to live with the impacts for up to 5 years. So for these reasons, I believe the application does not meet the standards we should expect, and I recommend refusal.
Thank you, Councillor Murray. Could I ask the planners and legal for any comments? No comment. Thank you. In that case, do we have a seconder for Councillor Murray's proposal? I'm not seen any seconder, no. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, can I record my dissent? If there's no seconder, I'd like to record my dissent.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? In that case, insofar as the board's interests are concerned, the members agree the recommendation at 3.1 to recommend to the council that the application be approved subject to the conditions set out at Appendix 1 to the report. Okay. Thank you. Number 2, erect 8 semi-detached houses and associated access road, footpath, service connections and surface water drainage at Upper Barvas, Isle of Lewis. The planning application has received more than 6 representations and in accordance with the scheme of delegation cannot be determined under delegation and is therefore referred to the board as a decision. And can I ask Helen MacDonald again to speak to this report? Thank you, Helen.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the application is a local application for 8 semi-detached houses with associated access, footpath, service connections and drainage, and it's located in Upper Barvas in the Isle of Lewis. Again, to give you some wider context for this particular site, the bottom central part of the image there, you can see the road coming across the Barvas Muir into the west side, and we turn north into Barvas, which is a coalesced settlement consisting of Lower Barvas and Upper Barvas. The little yellow star indicates the site there. I'll just take you a bit closer in. The red line you can see at the top left as it touches the main road there is the dividing line between Upper and Lower Barvas. The predominant portion of the application site at the north there is for the housing, access road and drainage, and the smaller thinner red line you can see coming towards the south is for a proposed footpath to join in with an existing pathway that would route residents of the proposed development back towards the footpath and bus stop in the Lower Barvas area. Again, 8-house development with associated infrastructure within the rural settlement of Upper Barvas. The site extends to approximately 1.59 hectares. It includes, as noted before, that off-road pathway to the south, The access route proposed, it does not have a public footpath. The vehicular access, my apologies, doesn't have a public footpath, hence the proposed addition of an off-road path to take people to the existing pavement. Site is currently used for grazing, but it is not classed as prime agricultural land. The surroundings are other parcels of agricultural land, residential and agricultural uses. While the site is not within any designated areas for habitat or landscape value, it does sit within proximity of the Lewis Peatlands SPA and the Ness and Barbas SPA, designated for particular protected bird species. The proposal is a local development in terms of the planning hierarchy. So I'll take you back to an aerial side by side with the proposed layout. Quite a simple development in terms of the physical works. You can see the access road coming in at the north point there, the surface water drainage proposals to the north of that access, and the 8 houses and floor blocks just to the south. The dark green areas you can see there are proposed dense thicket planting for screening with adjacent properties. We zoom in so you can see it a bit better. The majority of the pattern of Barbas is quite linear. However, this area does have quite a long established backland development to the south there. The proposed houses are all of the same design, 3-bedroom properties, as noted in 4 blocks with 8 properties in total. Take you through some images to get some context. This is looking towards Upper Barbas. Those are the first properties in Upper Barbas there. The very dark hipped roof property in the top left is quite a handy marker point to orient yourself through the remainder of the images. This is where the access would be taken from the main road there. This is from the same point, but looking towards Lower Barbas. The access road will come in behind these 3 properties, as we saw in the previous site plan, with the development site set further back in towards the common grazing ground. I've got an aerial overview on the right-hand side there. So if you can imagine yourself where the little star is, I'll take you through some images to show you what the site would look like in relation to its surroundings. That's that dark roof property I mentioned before in the centre of the image there. This is us looking directly north as though we're standing on the access proposed for the site, and I'll take you across some images to see the actual housing site. Looking towards the northeast now, the red line shows where we begin to see some of the built development. Moving around again, the housing would sit on that slightly paler green ground as it's mapped, and that gate you can see is where the back of the houses would be located with the access just in front. Just take you around again. That fence line that's coming into view now will be where the footpath is proposed to route towards Lower Barbas. Again, on the satellite image and with some of the planting, you can see the backland housing development that already exists that would be close in line with the proposed housing. To give you some context on the nearest residential properties, the image on the bottom, if you can see the fence line that sweeps from right to left, from north to south, the proposed access route would come in through here behind these 3 houses that you can see in the image above. Let's see if I can actually use this pointer. No, I can't, Fiona. I'm probably pointing at the ceiling. My apologies. The house on the right with the outbuilding at the top, you can match it up. Thank you, Fiona. You can match that up with the aerial shot. The next property along, as you can see, has quite dense tree planting and is not quite so visible. And the next property along with the hipped roof is directly across from the back of the proposed houses. There is about a 60-metre wall-to-wall separation and a 30-metre garden-to-garden separation with the proposed housing. 7 public representations were received. They're summarised as follows, and they're considered throughout the policy and material consideration section in the report. I'll just give you a moment to review those. So the key planning issues that were raised and considered through policy Representation and consultee responses were the principle of the development at this location, the potential impact on the character of the settlement and the precedent of the proposals that it might set, residential amenity impacts, road and pedestrian safety, infrastructure impacts, including those on health and schools provision, and also impacts on wildlife and habitat. The report considers all of these matters and sets out an appraisal of these issues. The application has been accompanied by additional supporting information, including a design statement, a preliminary ecological appraisal, and also a sustainable travel plan. It is important to note that these last two documents do consider a wider project that the developer has in mind. However, this is not subject to this planning application and is not considered in the report. Any relevant mitigation measures in these accompanying documents can be secured by conditions should the application be approved. I have a small additional note to make here. My apologies. We received an email from the landlord of the Lower Barvis estate. This application site is right on the boundary of Upper and Lower Barvis, which are owned by different community landowners. It has come to our attention that Urisgausen, who are making the application, negated to notify the Lower Barvis estate of the planning application in terms of the procedural requirements, as they should have as landowners of the vehicular access and also of the land where the proposed footpath is. We have been corresponding with the Lower Barvis estate, and what we propose is that members consider and make their recommendation today, but that we would not take a decision for another 21 days to allow the Lower Barvis estate to consider the proposal, and if they have any comments, and should any material considerations come out of that consideration period, that 21-day period that have not been addressed in the report, that we would take the application back to members for further consideration. It's worth noting that land ownership is not a material consideration in itself, and also that the Lower Barvis estate have control over their own ground, and if they're unhappy with any of the elements, a planning consent, a planning decision doesn't confer any rights for that work to be carried out in contravention of the landowner's wishes. So that just came in late last night, so my apologies for not being able to brief you on that sooner. So we do recommend approval subject to conditions, but we also wish to hold that for the next 21 days and only take a decision after that time, and to come back to the committee should any additional matters be raised. So happy to take any questions, and sorry for that little addition at the end there.
Thank you very much, Helen, for another detailed report and for that wee note at the end. Can I ask if there's any questions or comments in relation to that or the report as a whole? Councillor Murray, George.
Thank you, Chair. It's me again. I know that planners have put a bit of emphasis, certainly in current developments, on amenities, public, public play parking, and I know it's not a consideration, and there is a play park just up the road from this site. Is there any way that this is taken into some form of consideration for this development? It's 8 3-bedroom houses. Eventually there'll be quite a few children there, and I don't know the point I'm trying to make, but I'm trying to make the point of providing amenity for potential families that'll be there. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Public amenity is certainly a consideration. We do have a condition proposed that asks for a public realm scheme to be submitted. It's maybe not quite so formal as requesting play equipment, but to ensure that the area they've designated for public amenity, which is around the Suds Basin, the surface water at the north there, does consider that, whether it be in the form of seating or landscaping that encourages imaginative play. 8 houses is a relatively small scheme, and while we don't have a specific cut-off policy or scale, given that it is quite an extensive and recently renovated, community renovated play park, what we sought was the pedestrian connection to ensure there was a safe route for residents, including children, supervised obviously, to access those amenities that exist in the village. But obviously it's for members if they want to make any additional comments or requirements, if they think that's appropriate.
Thank you, George. Thank you, Helen. Any other comments or questions? No. In that case, do members agree the recommendation at 3.1 that the application be approved, subject to the conditions set out in Appendix 1 to the report?
20-day period.
And the 21-day period. Thank you. Before we go on to number 3, would anybody wish for a 3-minute comfort break? Yeah, so a 3-minute comfort break, please.
I just want to get Mark in on them.
Thank you all very much indeed.
Yes, use the gavel.
When's the last time we used the gavel in here?
Oh, Arnold uses them all the time.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. The next item on the agenda is a response to a consultation by Scottish Ministers for Development in the Marine Environment. While this item is not a planning application, members should be aware that the Council is also currently handling an application for planning permission for onshore infrastructure in relation to the same project that is the subject of the report before the board today. A report on the planning application for related development will come before the board in due course. The application for consent of marine licence associated with the offshore work for Sporret Amara offshore wind farm on the northwest of the Isle of Lewis. The report seeks to determine the view that the Council, in respect of a consultation request received from Scottish Ministers on the 16th of March 2026, in respect of an Environmental Impact Assessment, an EIA report, and the applications made to them to construct and operate Sporret Amara offshore wind farm. The Council is not the determining authority and is asked to respond to the Scottish Government consultation. The board is asked to make a recommendation to the Council, who will consider the report at its meeting tomorrow. Morag Ferguson will speak to the report and, together with Anne Napier, will also answer any questions. I invite Morag to give a report.
Thank you, Chair. Chair said this is a report on a consultation that's been received from Scottish Ministers on Section 36 consent and marine licences for an offshore wind farm named the Sporret Amara offshore wind farm, which it's proposed to be located off the northwest coast of Lewis. Sporret Amara, otherwise also known as N4 offshore site, which is the subject of the applications in the report before members today, was granted a lease by Crown Estate Scotland in 2022, along with 16 others. These are at various stages of development. Sporret Amara has been working over the last 4 years on the preparation of EIA reports to support applications for the consents they require in order to develop the wind farm. They've also conducted a large number of pre-application engagement events on the island over the last number of years. The consenting regime for offshore wind is such that a number of different consents and licences are required. While Scottish Ministers do have powers to grant planning permission through a deemed planning permission consent, they do not always elect to do that. And in this case, the report before members relates to a consultation on consents for under the Electricity Act, Section 36 consent to build and operate a generating station, and 2 applications for marine licence, one of which is for the generating station and the other one for the transmission infrastructure at sea. Scottish Ministers are the determining body for these applications. The planning permission for the related onshore works has been made. The application for planning permission for the onshore works has been made to the Comhairle Planning Authority. That's for the building and engineering works that will be on land, and a further report will come before the Comhairle on that application. The slide is just to illustrate the relationship between the consenting regimes. So marine license are required for development up to the limit of marine mean high water springs. The same with the Section 36 consent of the Electricity Act. And then town and country planning is required for any development above mean low water springs. So there is an overlap in the consenting regimes in the intertidal area. The Comhairle is only one of a number of consultation bodies in respect of the consents subject of the report. Scottish ministers will also have consulted other consultees, including Nature Scot, SEPA, Historic Environment Scotland. We understand local community councils and a number of other relevant authorities and stakeholders who will provide input to ministers on different aspects of the development. Marine Directorate do not apprise the Comhairle of the response of other consultation bodies, nor of the detail of representations made by the public. The Scottish ministers will take the response of the Comhairle into account alongside all other relevant matters, including contributions by others when making their decision. I thought it would be beneficial for members to see the scope of the offshore EIA report. It covers a broad range of topics which are listed there in blue, between chapter 6 up to chapter 25. Many of these topics relate to matters which are not within the expertise of the Comhairle. These will be examined and commented on by other consultees, as well as by officers employed by Marine Directorate itself. They have quite an extensive marine ecology team, and Marine Directorate will ultimately carry out the assessment of the applications for consent on behalf of Scottish ministers. The focus of our assessment or the focus of our examination of the EIA has therefore been limited to the topics where either the Comhairle has expertise or where the effects have a particular bearing on the area of the Comhairle as planning authority. So these include, first of all, the principle of the development of the wind farm in the location where it's proposed, effects on seascape, landscape and visual amenity, impacts and effects on cultural heritage assets, effects of airborne noise, and also effects on the local economy, including tourism and fish farm, commercial fisheries. This slide shows the extent of the offshore wind farm site. It's that outlined in red. If you were to project the north and the south boundaries ashore onto the coast, the wind farm would roughly extend from Carloway to Upper Barvas. Closest point is of the site to the shore is 5 kilometres, and the closest turbine is just over 6 kilometres. The effects obviously are considered broader than just the immediate Carloway to Upper Barvas area. Allied to this, as I mentioned, there is offshore infrastructure which will come across from Barvas to Stornoway, and that's subject to a current planning application and will subject of a future report to the Planning Board and the Comhairle. The EIA is required to assess the realistic worst case scenario. In other words, they need, in compiling an EIA, a developer is required to consider like the extremes. So the largest footprint, the tallest structure, the worst case interaction of the effects. So in this case, the proposal is to construct a fixed bottom offshore wind farm. So that means that the foundations will be grouted into the seabed. So it's not a floating, although it's at sea, it isn't a floating system. The potential expected capacity is around 900 megawatts. The developer is considering two different design options. 44 turbine option has turbines with a maximum blade tip height of 338 square meters above mean sea level, and 60. The second alternative is 60 turbines, and under that option, the blade tip height would be 293 meters above sea level. They also have considered two different options for the substation. So one scenario is that the substation platform would be at sea, and the second scenario is that the landfall substation would be on land on a site identified on the coast at Barvas. And then ultimately the connection would be into the grid near Stornoway, where the HVDC, the SSEN HVDC hub is proposed. Just on the design options, there are a series of visualizations at the end of the presentation, and these are for the smaller number of larger turbines. So in terms of the substation options, so the slide illustrates the option where they to go for the scenario of the offshore substation. So with an offshore substation, there would be like a multi-leg jacket foundation with a transition piece. The substation would sit on top of that at sea. It would be accessed and serviced from the sea. And then what would happen is the cables would come ashore. They would be drilled through horizontal directional drilling through the rock below ground level and come into a transition joint bay at Barvas. There would be no substation ashore, and the cables would come across the moor towards Stornoway. Under the second scenario, there would be no substation at sea. Again, the cables would be drilled below ground, come into a transition joint bay ashore. There would then be like a landfall substation at Barvas. And then again, the cabling coming across the moor towards the substation at Stornoway. Just to understand the actual detail of the turbine generators and how they would appear. So on the right hand side is the full height of the structure that would need to be installed to support the wind turbine. So you would have like a multi-leg jacket foundation, which would either be pile driven or grouted into the seabed. The jacket will be, because it's in the marine environment, will be treated and painted. They're typically yellow, painted yellow, and the transition piece and the top of the foundation piece will be visible above the water limit. Obviously, like more of it visible at low tide than at high tide, but there's a part of it that will be visible before the actual turbine tower and then the actual hub and rotor itself. On the left hand side, typical wind turbine generator would have a maximum rotor diameter, hub sitting on top of a tower, and they would be bolted onto the transition piece on the foundation. So in terms of the actual scope of the works, the slide sets out the scope of the works and the likely duration. Just allow members to read that slide. So the onshore and the offshore works would both programmed across a 5-year period, and these would be going on simultaneously. It's important to note that percussive piling, which we'll discuss later in the presentation, it would be restricted to 5 hours of any day. The slide details the two layouts that have been explored by the developer. So one on the left is for 60 turbines at the lower height of 293, and the one on the right for 44 turbines at the larger height of 338 metres. The area that's hatched in blue is the area where all turbines would be contained. The layout was adjusted in order to remove any turbines from the part of the site that's in the south, in order to increase the distance between the turbines and the boundary of the South Lewis Harris North Uist National Scenic Area. The turbines around the perimeter of the site and a limited number of others that are identified in red are turbines where there would require to be navigation lighting. So these would be lit at night for aviation safety. The offshore substation, if it were to be, if that scenario were to be adopted, is identified in yellow on each of the layouts. The wedge, the kind of pink wedge, then coming in towards Barvis, is the area for the cables coming ashore. Okay, the next number of slides will just take you through briefly through our consideration of the matters that inform this recommendation before the board. The detail is set out in the report which has been circulated to all members and has been made public on the Comhairle website. So the first issue that has been considered is the principle of development of a wind farm in this location. So the site itself, option N4, was identified in the Scottish Government's sectoral marine plan. The developer contends that along with some other policy matters, establishes the principle of development of the wind farm in this location. We don't share that view. Further, we don't accept that the scheme is necessary to achieve the climate change targets that were set out for ScotWind, and that the inclusion in the sectoral marine plan does not establish an overriding need for this particular project. Based on the topics that we'll cover in the next few slides, it's our view that the location is not acceptable due to the particular impacts on the local authority area, and that is despite recognising the importance of maximising renewable energy generation. Our view is that it should not be at any cost. So the first matter that we examined in the EIA was to do with seascape, landscape and the visual effects. And there is a consensus between the developer's own EIA and our independent examination of that part of the EIA that the wind farm would, if built, result in significant effects on the landscape and visual amenity of the northwest coast of Lewis and beyond, including on the South Lewis Harris National Scenic Area. That is a key negative of the proposal, which Scottish ministers will require to balance against the positives of the offshore wind development in arriving at their decision. The assessment within the applicant's EIA is comprehensive and using appropriate methodology. It's absolutely fair. It includes visualizations taken from 39 viewpoints, and a selection of those will be shown at the end of the presentation. These are also available in paper copy, should any member wish to view them ahead of council meeting tomorrow. They're contained in committee room 3 within the council offices here at Sandwick Road. So in our view, the seascape landscape of visual effects conflicts with the policies, landscape policies of National Planning Framework 4, those of the National Marine Plan and those contained within the Outer Hebrides Local Development Plan. We also take the view that the significance effect is so great that the proposal meets the requirement of the Electricity Act to have regard to the desirability of preserving natural beauty of the countryside and to do what can reasonably be done to mitigate such effects. The slide is just an extract from the developer's zone of theoretical visibility. So these diagrams illustrate where it is likely that the extent of the wind farm that would be viewed. So you can see in the key on the bottom left there that the area that's identified in lilac colouring is the area where between 36 and 44 of the turbines would be visible, or rather the hubs would be visible. So you can see that the turbines would be visible not just along the coast but in fairly extensive areas inland from the development as well. There are a total of 39 viewpoints. They start at the Butt of Lewis and move down the coast. The key there just illustrates where 21 of them are. It's not easy to see the detail of the locations on the slide. And then the second slide, there's a bit of a duplication in the list, but again, viewpoints all the way along the coast. They're listed there in the key on the right-hand side. Again, the areas that are identified in lilac is where between 36 and 44 of the hubs would be visible. Then when you go into the blue, the green and the orange areas where lesser number of hubs would be visible, but everywhere there's a colour on the overlay is somewhere where the some of the turbine hubs and therefore the blades would be visible. The cultural heritage chapter of the EIA covers marine archaeology, and the assessment of that is appropriate and its conclusions fair. However, in relation to the assessment of the effects on heritage assets ashore, our examination concludes that the EIA assessment is deficient and does not demonstrate understanding of the relationship of many of the heritage assets on the coast with maritime routes of travel and settlements along the coast. Our assessment is that there's just an underestimation, particularly of the setting impacts on heritage assets and on places, and that there are errors and omissions in the baseline data that was used to compile the assessment. Again, our view is that the significance of effect is so great that it fails to meet the requirements of the Electricity Act for developments to have regard to the desirability of protecting sites, buildings and objects of architectural, historic or archaeological interest, and to do what they can to mitigate such effects. Again, the development not policy compliant. Both the cultural heritage effects and the landscape and visual effects are such that, on account of the nature of the development, the height of the structures, the proximity to the coast, are such that there's very little that can be done to mitigate the effects. And therefore, the significant effects would remain. Again, this slide is an extract from the zone of theoretical visibility. Again, prepared for the 44 turbine option. This one is slightly different in that it's illustrating where blade tips would be visible rather than where hubs would be visible. It shows in black there the scheduled monuments, of which there are many, both located along the coast and inland along the northwest coast of Lewis. Scheduled monuments are scheduled because they are of national importance. Listed buildings, Butt of Lewis Lighthouse, Arnold Black House, and there are some others inland there as well. The developer's assessment concluded that only 2 sites would experience significant effects, those being the Carloway Broch and Comhairle, which is contained within the Bragar, the old church, which is within the cemetery at Bragar, very near to the shore at Bragar, so within that cemetery. But given the acknowledgement of the widespread effects of the development on landscape and visual amenity, that conclusion is considered quite surprising. And our view is that the assessment, considerably underestimates the effects. The other topics that were looked at were airborne noise. There is proposal that in order to install the foundation pieces, there would be a requirement for percussive piling. So that's like piles that are driven with a hammer. Noise does travel over water. We have experience of that in the past through other developments. And having examined this part of the EIA, there's concerns over the assessment methodology and clarity of the findings, worst case scenario, questions as to whether that has been robustly addressed, uncertainty remaining about actually what the piling noise might translate into and the resultant human health impacts of that noise. Again, our view is that it doesn't demonstrate policy compliance and that there's concern that the mitigation measures that have been proposed are not clearly defined and there is uncertainty over whether they could be secured and effectively implemented, such as would be necessary to protect human health. This is just a quick slide that illustrates the extent of the area that will be subject to percussive piling. So the area that's identified in pink with the blue hatching is the area where it's proposed that piling of the cylindrical piles would take place to install the foundations. The area in grey to the south, there is an exclusion proposed for piling in that area, so a different method of installation would be required. And the reason for that exclusion is because of Atlantic salmon, which is a feature of the Loch Langavat SAC, would come into the loch system along that route, and therefore the effects of piling noise on that protected species means that piling could not be undertaken in that southern part of the site. The other area, you'll see that there's a landfall exit pit area identified in green, and that's where the horizontal directional drilling would commence to come in under the land to the transition joint bay for the cables to come ashore. The EIA also includes a socio-economic impact assessment. That sets out the potential benefits of the development from a socio-economic point of view. There is also a separate chapter on commercial fisheries, which again have socio-economic benefits to the Outer Hebrides area. And there is also a section on tourism. These sections of the EIA were examined by colleagues in economic development, and again concerns, while the the potential socioeconomic benefits are acknowledged. What has been identified is the methodology for assessing them is inconsistent, and particularly in relation to tourism, the data used is outdated, and the impacts potentially underestimated, and also concerns that the mitigation measures that are proposed are not specific, and concerns just over how they could be secured, and in that situation that local socioeconomic benefits may not materialise. Again, commercial fisheries has been looked at, and concerns again to do with displacement, loss of grounds, mitigation, and concerns over policy conflict, and just concerns over whether the mitigation, whether the impacts that are likely to arise could be adequately mitigated. Therefore, the conclusion of officers based on their examination of the EIA report is that there are deficiencies. The project EIA doesn't assess the project as a whole, and that is potentially to do with the fact that actually this EIA is focused on the offshore works only. It doesn't provide a robust methodology in key areas, as we've covered, particularly heritage, socioeconomic, and noise. So our view is it does not meet the EIA regulatory requirements overall, and we would anticipate that that those omissions could be highlighted by other consultees also, and that that would require to be addressed before Scottish ministers would be in a position to take a decision. So, in conclusion, the significant adverse effects on landscape, seascape, and visual amenity, and on cultural heritage in particular, cannot be mitigated further, and our view is that these are of such harm that their impacts are not outweighed by the renewable energy benefits that would undoubtedly arise from the construction of a 900 megawatt offshore wind farm. In summary, our recommendation is therefore that the Comhairle should object to the Section 36 and marine licence applications, raise concerns about the adequacy of the EIA report, state that the development fails to meet the policy tests set out in Appendix 2, the policy framework set out in Appendix 2 to the report. It's our view that it fails to meet the requirements of the Electricity Act on account of effects on heritage assets and on landscape and visual amenity, and to emphasise the significant harm that would arise to the natural beauty of the Outer Hebrides and to the historic environment resource. There follows just a number of visualisations which are from the developers' landscape and visual amenity impact assessment. I will just share those. So this first visualization is of the wind farm taken from Melbus Wars. This is the furthest north one that I have taken. So just for the benefit of members, so this is actually viewed at its actual size, so it's at 100%. Any of the visualizations can be verified. Any of the digital visualizations can be verified by members by comparison to the paper copies which we hold. So in terms of the actual, this is like starting at the north extreme of the wind turbine array. So from the shore, you could see that the foundation and the transition platform on which the generator would sit would be visible. And from this particular viewpoint, all of the wind farm would be visible along the coast. In the middle of the visualization there, the offshore substation, if that option were pursued. Then this is the same, taken from the same viewpoint, and as I mentioned, the turbines on the perimeter and a few others to the southwest would require to be lit at night, and there is a selection of nighttime viewpoints that have been provided, including this one from Melville Wharf. It wasn't totally dark, but it actually provides like a very good view of how the turbines would appear silhouetted on the northwestern horizon, particularly in the late summer nights and in winter nights where you get quite a lot of clarity in the air and visibility. This next one is at Comhairle. So this is up in the northwest. So Comhairle, members may recall there have been reports before the Comhairle before on the Comhairle. Comhairle is reputed, it's a scheduled monument. It's reputed to be Scotland's tallest standing stone. And again, like the turbine array would be visible from the stone, would be visible all the way like along the horizon there. And that's an example of where significant effects have not been predicted on that particular heritage asset. The next one is as you drop into Arnold Village. So this is like on the village road as you move down, so you can see like the crofts of Arnold there, and then you'd be looking, across the wind farm, and again, like all along, like the seascape, there would be the wind turbine array would be visible, and then you would drop down towards down towards the coast. So these are some of the houses in the village, but Arnold would certainly, as you come into the village of Arnold, there would be extensive visibility of the wind turbines, and down towards the coast, the old village and the Arnold Black House, which is a listed building and a building in care. So that's the as you just come up to the Black House, it's down closer to the coast. You can see the sign there. So there's the Arnold at the Black House. So again, like you would have visibility of the turbines, the offshore substation, if that's proposed. And so that's you standing, coming out the door of the Arnold Black House, which is obviously like a heritage asset, a listed building, also a visitor destination. And part of the old village down by the shore. So I mean, the actual Arnold itself is quite a historic place, lots of stone walling remaining, and the village has a very particular character. This next one is actually taken at Braggart Beach, and so you're down by the slipway. So the visualization is taken quite low down. Probably hadn't, when the viewpoints were selected, we maybe hadn't really given to consideration that maybe actually it would have been a better point to take it up at the cemetery. But again, like at this low point down by the shore, you're going to see the turbines behind that like headland, and then across the bay itself. But so you can see the slipway there, but just up behind on the slipway, higher ground on the Barvas Macher is the Barvas Cemetery. It's a very large cemetery, a very old cemetery, and within it there is Comhairle, so St. John's Chapel, which is again like a historic, a scheduled monument, and that is one of the sites where the Cultural Heritage Assessment did assess a likely significant effect on that scheduled monument. This next one is the Shawbust Core Path, and this is probably the one where the turbines are closest to the landmass. So again, the wind turbines would be visible really across, the whole of the panorama of the coast from the core path at Shawbust, including again the offshore substation. Then within the village of Shawbust, this visualization was asked to be taken up at the road. It's taken just outside the entrance into the school and the campsite. And the Shawbust Beach down here, and so this is like an inland loch with a raised beach. It's quite a popular place for both visitors and locals to go to. So again, like at Shawbust, there would be really significant visual effects on that community and village. This is the other, so this is Comhairle. So again, like a scheduled monument heritage asset, when you're up at the Broch, you're looking out to sea, and again, like from this viewpoint, there would be visibility of the turbines all across like the landscape, and they would appear, on the horizon above the villages, the crofting villages, and the linear crofting settlement pattern there, and therefore would be quite dominant. Again, this is the other cultural heritage viewpoint where it's acknowledged that there would be significant effects. Then this viewpoint is another nighttime visualization. It's within the National Scenic Area, and it is the Reef Beach over at Uig. So this, because it's taken in dark at where the night sky is darker, it's easier to appreciate the lighting that would be visible on the turbines at night. I'll just take you up to the daytime. So this is the same beach taken during the, with a visualization of during the day. Again, a very popular tourist destination. Again, beside campsite, a popular campsite over in Uig, and a very valued beach from both a local visitor and visitor point of view. Then Gallen Head, again within the National Scenic Area over in Uig, elevated viewpoint, looking out to sea. Again, like the wind farm, you'd be looking end onto the wind farm here, and again it would be visible all along the horizon on the seascape. There's also like a nighttime visualization from that. Then Dalmore Beach, another beach on the west coast of Lewis, very popular for surfing, very popular enclosed beach with kind of high cliffs on either side. And again, the entire beach, the wind turbines would fill the whole of the beach that's framed by the landform. And then finally, in this visualization, I've actually taken from the onshore EIA because it provides like a visualization of how the wind farm would look inland as you approach Barbas over the Barbas Moor. So for those of you familiar with travelling over to Barbas on the Moor Road, this is kind of like a high point as you kind of just start to drop down into Barvas, and the wind turbines would be seen part of the array and then over the top of the landscape in that view as well. So that concludes the presentation. I'm happy to take any questions along with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Morag, for that detailed report. Before I open the floor up to any questions, I would just like to read the following. I would like to remind members that a report on the onshore elements relating to the offshore wind farm are subject to a separate planning application to the Comhairle. A report on that will come before the Comhairle at a later date. Members should therefore focus their questions and only raise matters pertaining to the applications for the offshore applications that are the subject of the report before the board today. So, with that in mind, has anybody got any questions for Morag or Anne? Staff are online.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks, Morag. Just a clarification. Obviously, this development, it's a bigger scale, but when you said obviously the impact or the negative impact that wind farm has on cultural heritage and the beauty of the island, would that principle, the same principle, apply on inland wind farms, on onshore wind farms? So I'm just wanting to see.
Yes, that's a provision of the Electricity Act, so it is a requirement for all generating stations to have regard to the preservation of the beauty of the countryside and protection of heritage assets.
Thank
So
you.
it's a legislative requirement.
Okay, thank you, Morag.
Thank you, Mustafa. Councillor Susan Thompson.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Morag. Just a procedural question, really. There's two options for the substation. If the substation ends up, if they choose to have it on land, will that still be consented by ministers, or would it come to us in that scenario?
The application for planning permission includes for the potential for a substation on land, and therefore that forms part of the planning application. On the given that the developer has to assess worst case scenario and the decision hasn't been made as to which would be more appropriate, it's been necessary for them to include the substation offshore in the offshore assessment and for an onshore, but it's not intended that there will be both. But the planning application will require to consider the option of the onshore substation, and that has been included in the application for planning permission, which will come before the Comhairle for determination.
Thanks, Morag.
Thank you. Any further questions? Sorry, George or Councillor Marty? Councillor George Marty.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Morag. That's really helpful. I find it difficult to envisage whether they're 200 metre or 250 metre high, unless I could compare the images with maybe a familiar landmark. For instance, maybe the Eiffel Tower from a similar distance, just to give a comparison to see, is there anyone out there could do such a thing, alter these photos, just so that we can have something comparative with something familiar. I'm not trying to be awkward, Morag, or pour rain on your parade, but just to, give a bit of comparison.
I mean, at the moment, there isn't anything comparable in height to the Outer Hebrides. The turbines that have been consented for the Stornoway wind farm, further to the moor, they're 200 metres tall, but obviously they've not been developed. Nationally, it's been, I understand that the turbines are in the kind of broad range of height of the Shard in London, but obviously that is building is within a kind of urban environment in a totally different context. But the visualizations are accurate. So the visualizations have been professionally prepared. They're available in paper copy if you're minded to view them, but there isn't, I mean, wind turbines by their nature and the need for offshore wind turbines to generate significant amounts of power per unit means that they are large.
Yeah, okay. Can I reply, Chair?
Sure.
Absolutely, I get that, but we see wind turbines at sea. To me, they're just propellers in the sea until I can compare them with something, a photograph maybe of, or something superimposed taken from a similar distance to the distance that the turbines are away from us, just to give me an idea of the actual height. Thank you. Last question too.
All I can say is that their dominance and their height will vary depending on how far you are away from them. So I didn't show there was a visual. I didn't when I presented those visualizations. I didn't go through the actual distances they are away from the shore. There is one that's provided from the Butt of Lewis, which I haven't actually put in the presentation, but if members do wish me to bring it up, I can find that. And that's viewed at 20 kilometres. That would be, and at that the turbine generators obviously appear smaller because they're at a distance.
Yeah.
But the closer to the shore you are, then obviously the structures are then more dominant because you're seeing them close up. And obviously if you were to be in a boat at sea, then the foundation pieces would be quite large when you were sailing around them or underneath them. So I'm not sure that helps, but all I can say is that the visualizations are an accurate representation of how they would be viewed from the viewpoints that you've been shown, and that if there's any concern over the scaling or the digital presentation of those, then the paper copies are available to view, and we can bring those into the chamber tomorrow if that would help.
Thank you. Councillor Noddy MacDonald.
I think your example, George, of Eiffel Tower is pretty good. If these are an accurate representation of the heights we're talking about, if they go for the 44 turbine option of 338 metres, the tip height above sea level, 338 metres, the Eiffel Tower is 330 metres, so you're talking about 44 Eiffel Towers.
Thank you. Any further questions? In that case, insofar as the board's interests are concerned, do members agree the recommendation at 3-1? Thank you all very much, and a special thank you to our presenters today, Helen and Morag, and to the whole department for all the hard work in preparing the presentations that we saw today. And that is the end of the meeting. Thank you all for coming.